we intend to make a discussion. And so this is definitely meant to be a dialogue and an opportunity to create a framework for success as we continue to try and solve the issues associated with the digital divide. As a real quick context, the SoCal transformation effort's been going on for coming up on 19, 20 months with the fundamental question, how do we make sure Southern California is better prepared for the next pandemic? What are the lessons we should be learning now in order to ensure that whatever disaster strikes, that we can handle it better? One of the things that quickly rose to the top was the digital divide. Issues of telehealth, teleeducation, telework, telejustice, et cetera, clearly were challenges that people that did not have good internet connectivity were having to suffer their way through. And we can talk about some of the numbers and some of the impacts of that. But Southern California coming together with all 7 counties, SCAG and SANDAG, has truly been a remarkable feat and an opportunity for us to move the agenda as opposed to the region working in isolation. And I'm very pleased to say that all 7 counties have participated in a number of communications with DC, and SCAG and SANDAG have significantly stepped up to provide the overall strategic planning and direction as we go forward. With that, it gives me great pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of SANDAG, Mr. Akrada. Hassan.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much, Secretary McPeak. Good afternoon to all of you, and thank you for allowing me to speak for a couple of minutes. Just simply solving for the digital divide and connecting our communities to high-speed, reliable internet is imperative to our quality of life, economic well-being, and future of transportation. As Metropolitan Planning Organization, SANDAG and SCAG recognize the importance of this work to improve equity, mobility, sustainability in our regions. Our Governor Newsom signed Executive Order 73020, we went to work. We established a digital divide task force, joined other leaders throughout the state that are committed to bridging the digital divide, and are happy to report that we just completed our regional digital divide equity strategy. This strategy outlined a common vision and framework for expanding broadband access to everyone in the San Diego region. Initiatives like the workshop that convened public, housing leaders, ISPs, and stakeholders together will lay the foundation to bring critically needing internet connection to people's home, especially in areas that they either don't have it or underserved. Working together with our partner SCAG, we will definitely take advantage of this tremendous opportunity to improve the broadband access for most of the state population. Between SCAG and SANDAG, we're about 60% of the state population. I am certain that this workshop will be the first of many collaborations with all of you, and I look forward to our continued partnership. And let me just say a couple of words that Secretary McPeak, Steve Pantel, these are, you started this idea, I call it, you started this mess, and we listened to you, and we're glad you did, and I'm grateful. I'm sure I can speak for Comey at SCAG, grateful for your leadership. And again, this is not going to be the only workshop we're going to talk about connectivity, but we want to be able to measure our results. So thank you for giving me the floor for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Hassan. Absolutely. And also from SANDAG, to just talk a little bit more about SANDAG's initiative, Antoinette Meyer, the Director of Mobility and Innovation. Antoinette.
Thank you, Steve. I'm really excited to see such interest in this topic today and so many different organizations represented. So a little bit of background on SANDAG, because I don't want to assume that everybody knows who we are. We're the Metropolitan Planning Organization. We're also the Regional Transportation Agency for the San Diego region, which is 18 cities in the county of San Diego. And our board is made up of elected officials from each of those jurisdictions. And you might be wondering why a regional transportation agency has become so involved with broadband. But as Hassan mentioned, having a connected region is really critical to quality of life and our economic competitiveness in the region. During the pandemic, we saw just how our unconnected residents were really completely cut off from society and jobs and school and all of those critical services. But less obvious is probably the relationship to transportation. But if you think about it, over the last decade, technology has fundamentally changed how we move. A small example of that is how all of us rely on app-enabled transportation services and trip planning tools and navigation systems, and that dependency is only going to grow. So broadband connectivity is really essential to how we plan, how we design, how we build and operate transportation into the future. So our board of directors fortunately recognized this relationship between broadband and all of our regional priorities. They adopted a resolution last January. They committed us to developing a digital equity strategy, and we'll be bringing that to them tomorrow for a discussion. Also, to support us with developing that strategy, we formed a multidisciplinary task force. It's made up of representatives from public sector, community-based nonprofit organizations, some of who are here today, broadband providers. In fact, the San Diego Housing Commission, who you'll hear from soon, is a very active member of our task force. And we worked with this task force over the course of the last year to conduct what we call a broadband gap analysis, to really understand where there are infrastructure and service disparities in our region. What we found is that the rural part of our region, which includes our tribal nations, only has about 66% of households with access to fixed broadband service. In our urbanized areas of the region, most households have fixed broadband service available, but for many, it's not affordable. So adoption is low. We've got up to 20% or more of low-income households in some of our most disadvantaged communities that don't have a computer or internet service at home. So you can imagine what that was like during the pandemic. There's a lot of other data that we have. We recently launched a digital divide story map that's available on our website, and we can add a link to that in the chat. But that data is what really informed the development of our strategy. So today's discussion is really a critical step towards implementing our strategy. Our goal is to get everyone connected to the internet, make sure that everybody has a device, knows how to use that device. But partnerships are absolutely essential to doing that work. There's not a single organization that can do it alone. Everyone has a role to play. So we're thrilled to be here with you. We really want to explore how we can collaborate to connect residents of public housing, which is a big step towards closing the digital divide. So with that, I think I'll hand it over back to Steve.
Thank you, Antoinette. And from SCAG, Sarah Jepson, the Director of Planning. Sarah.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks Hassan and Antoinette for providing really the background on why metropolitan planning organizations are involved in this work. SCAG is the Metropolitan Planning Organization for 191 cities and 6 counties, including Los Angeles, Orange County, San Bernardino, Riverside, Ventura, and Imperial. Like SANDAG, our leadership is comprised of elected officials from across our region who guide our work. And similar to SANDAG, one of the main products that we put together is our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy, which we call Connect SoCal. And our plan was adopted last year, but a new element of it was really focused on a strategy that we called smart cities. And we're recognizing more and more that the goal that we're trying to achieve is better access to jobs and opportunities. And you can achieve that access not just through mobility, but through digital access, as we've all learned through the pandemic. So we are really working to better understand this new area and to develop our programs to support digital access and focusing on better understanding and addressing issues related to the digital divide. So our board similarly then adopted a resolution last February, pledging that we would work towards addressing the digital divide. And I just want to highlight 4 main areas that we are working in right now. First of all, we are working to just better define the problem and to better understand the issues related to the digital divide through primarily, we do a lot of GIS mapping and to better understand and create maps to have a more granular understanding about where gaps in access exist. The second thing that we're doing is trying to work with our partners to access the funding that is now available to support on these issues. So California's broadband budget bill, which commits $6 billion to broadband, and then the federal infrastructure bill, which commits $65 billion toward broadband expansion, are really tremendous opportunities. And we want to do our best to work with partners to bring those resources to Southern California. And one of the ways that we're doing that is working with SANDAG on a request for partnerships. So as these funding opportunities come available, we have the partnerships in place so that funding can be pursued. The third area that we're working in is strategic and technical studies. We do a lot in our work around planning to put forward best practices and support others in advancing those best practices. So we're looking at developing regional consistent broadband policies, planning and permitting practices, and encouraging local adoption of those practices. We're also, related to our transportation work, we're continuing to look at the ways in which broadband can help in addressing our reducing vehicle miles traveled and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is an important environmental goal that we have in this region. And then finally, a fourth area that we are exploring is really looking at ways of integrating work to address the digital divide into our other programs, funding programs that we have at SCAG. So I'm going to mention just two of those, as these will be opportunities to collaborate with others in the future. First of all, we adopted a racial equity early action plan last year and are going to be releasing a call for projects to provide planning resources to community-based organizations and cities to improve mobility and accessibility while reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And we really want to think about how broadband planning can be part of this work. And so as we develop guidelines for those programs, again, we'll be looking to learn from partners about how we incorporate opportunities to address the digital divide into the structure of that program. The second program that we're looking at developing is we have some resources to support housing planning and housing production in the region. And so we're working on a new program that will look at housing supportive infrastructure and how we support housing supportive infrastructure. SCAG is expected to receive approximately $246 million through a new program that was established through AB 140. And we're waiting for the official guidance to come out from HCD on how those resources can be spent. But one of the things that we know is an issue in housing production is the cost of putting the infrastructure in place to support that housing, including electric, water, sewer, gas, and increasingly we understand broadband is going to be an important service. So as we're developing the guidelines for that program, again, we want to continue to think about how we can bring these issues in related to the digital divide. So as we put resources out in the community, it's really in a holistic way. We're just really excited to be here today. As I mentioned, this is a kind of a newer area for us. So we understand there's a lot of people doing great work in this area, and we want to figure out how we can be the best partner to move things forward so that everyone does have access to the internet. So thanks for including us in the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And there's going to be a ton of information. We are recording this meeting. There will be follow-up notes, et cetera. So you can try and capture as much, but just understand that. It also gives me great pleasure to introduce Secretary Sunny Wright McPeak, who has been passionately helping us figure out this pathway to move forward. Sunny.
Thank you, Steve. I'm with the California Emerging Technology Fund, and we were assigned by the California Public Utilities Commission back in 2005, the mission to close the digital divide. It was actually the CPUC who directed the establishment of CETF. And although we are not connected to the CPUC, we value very much being able to work with the CPUC and their various roles of rulemaking. This convening is pretty historic, And I just want to point out to everyone who has been in the trenches working to get residents in publicly subsidized housing connected to the internet, get them to be digitally proficient, provide other resident services, that this is a forum that you will welcome and see action. About 19 months ago, I got a call from Steve and Komia GC to say, we're working on closing the digital divide in Southern California. Can CETF participate? I am so grateful to the leadership that those two people, plus the San Diego Association of Governments and Executive Director Hassan Ikrada, have brought to this arena with their amazing teams. What a pleasure it has been for me to function as sort of an extension of SANDAG and SCAG. I love working with these extraordinarily capable and energetic professionals. So Antoinette and Crystal and Jack, and then Sarah and Roland and their colleagues at SCAG have really done a great job at National Core. Steve has Lorraine and Christy helping, and now a ton of more people. I say this because I want you to know they aim to get things done. So this is quite a forum. It is a really, I think, extraordinary that we have Dinah from HUD headquarters, Pablos from the California Housing and Community Development Department, and James from the CPUC here to also confer with us to help us identify resources. I also am extraordinarily excited that Carolyn Mcintyre with CCTA has helped plan this workshop. Whitney is here from Charter. I know other ISPs are going to be joining. Christine is here from AT&T. I expect Frontier as well. And then I need to do a shout out because somehow Louis Fox wandered into this forum as if he weren't already busy enough. Mr. Fox is the CEO of Scenic. Scenic has been tapped to be the third-party administrator for the $3.25 billion state middle mile network. And I think the common conversation is so important today. Lastly, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge, Sarah, when you were talking about all of the partnerships that SCAG has going on. One is to look at the relationship between broadband, VMT, and greenhouse gas emissions. And that is a Caltrans grant to SCAG that was actually made possible, or at least suggested, by Chris Schmidt, who's now back in San Diego in District 11. And Chris sort of drank the Kool-Aid and said, I get it, broadband is a green strategy for mobility. And that's what this conversation for the metropolitan planning organizations in their transportation responsibilities are doing, but also with your hats on for housing and allocation of responsibility. There is this intersection of policy. Lastly, I should explain to people who may never have known me as a secretary that I did serve in the governor's cabinet as Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing Agency a few years ago when BT&H still existed. And that is why Hassan still remembers having to deal with me when he was then at SCAG, and then SANDAG lured him away. But I also want to say to all of you, while my lens today, responsibility, is closing the digital divide, housing is really personal for me. And so I bring with me a passion to this job, and we are absolutely committed to get every resident in publicly subsidized housing in Southern California connected, and connected as quickly as possible. And that's what we're about today. Thank you, Steve, and we're here to have a very productive meeting.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. So just a real quick conversations like this, we anticipate occurring within the various silos of activity. So health, education, housing, et cetera. Because through those lenses, we believe we can get everybody connected to the internet. And so this is an important both foundation and test to see how we can all work together to make it happen. So today, the next, you're going to be hearing from a number of housers about their view, including both public and private housers. You will be hearing from some of the ISPs, and then as Sunny just mentioned, from HUD, HCD, and the CPUC. And so there's, like I said, there's going to be a lot of information coming. I'm not a huge fan of serial monologues. So if anybody has questions, put them in the chat. We'll weave them into the conversation as we go forward to make sure that we have as complete a conversation as possible. So with that, jumping right into the housing perspective, it gives me pleasure to introduce Luis Yatako, Director of Information Technology for the Housing Authority of the City of Los Angeles. So Luis, we're all yours.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
I think so. Well, so glad to be here. I mean, it's so exciting to hear about what the dialogue is going to be about. I'm Luis Yatako. I'm the IT Director, Housing Authority, City of Los Angeles. We have so much to share. They told me to bring that down to about 5 to 7 minutes. So we're going to get through some. We're probably not getting into a lot of the detail that I wish we would at some other time. But wanted to tell you a little bit about the Housing Authority in Los Angeles. We are the second largest housing authority in the nation, and we have 14 large housing communities. And that means about 7,000 families are reside in our communities, about 21,000 residents. 40% of them are school-age children. And that's not counting 100,000 other families that we help through other means. And wanted to let you know with this picture, I know it's a little bit tight, just to show you how spread out we are within the Metro LA area. And also, if you were to overlay the digital access map, our census map that we often have, we were not able to do it for this map, but you'll see that these are the areas in Los Angeles that have the less percentage of folks that are digitally connected. And wanted to give you a sense of how spread out we are, how large we are, and how great the need is in our housing authority for our communities. Our story started way back in even 2009 when One Economy paired up with AT&T through an Access All program. They brought in $100 million to spend within 3 years. And we were able, with that program, address the needs of one community of about 700 families, 2,400 residents. And back then, all that we could do was provide DSL speed for 31 DSL access areas to be shared with over 700 families. That's all we could do at the time. That was the only technology and the only speed that was available. And it's still, that's the only speed that is available today, about 3 to 4 megs of download speed in this area in the middle of Los Angeles. As we move forward in 2013, we paired up with the California Emerging Technology Fund. We were so grateful for the funding for that. We addressed another community. So by that time, it was 2 communities through a smart housing pilot partnership. And we really drove at that point now the concept of not just connectivity, but adoption as well. We were targeting 600 families to over 2,000 residents. We also received funding from California Teleconnect Fund, which was very helpful. As we moved forward, we also accessed funds from the California Advanced Services Funds. At that point now, moving the needle a little bit, another community of about 450 families and about 400 senior families also. So now we were expanding a little bit, again, with the available technology, trying to use mesh networks as best that we could to be able to provide a shared type of access network for the families. And then comes our partnership here with Connect Home. Connect Home really pulled together under the leadership of HUD, all housing authorities that were working hard in this effort for us. We had started many, many years before this concept started, but our goal has always been adoption. We understand, some of the pillars of connectivity, device, and literacy, really, that's just the tip of the iceberg. As over our history, we've been able to give families connected, get them the device, get them training. But the true challenge is to get them to stay with the adoption, to embrace technology on the different areas to improve their life, whether it be education, work, telehealth, citizen participation in all the different areas, even in job searching, and now with telework. And so just continue to and try to help them embrace that. And we have a dedicated group, some of which have joined us today, that are there working day and day with our different residents to be able to take what we're providing them and be able to embrace that even further. Through Connect Home, we were able to access partnerships with now wireless service providers like Sprint. They had a Connect Ed program that brought now, since wired connectivity was so difficult and so expensive, now we decided to think outside the box. Let's bring in cell connectivity through hotspots and try to provide those in a limited fashion for families as well. When AT&T acquired DirecTV, another partnership, another fund was able to come about, and they released a program called AT&T Access that tried to reach our communities, but it was really in a very limited way. There were many eligibility requirements, and also the infrastructure was not there. If you had not had an AT&T phone number in the past, your unit would not be able to receive this program. So you could have a community of hundreds of families, and only a segment of that community will be able to just participate in this program. As we move forward and we started continuing the same trend of partnerships, we went into what we're now involved in more closely, which is our partnership with T-Mobile. Again, following the idea of trying to bring something, even if it's short term, to allow for that connectivity through hotspots. And we've been able to do 1,300 hotspots or distributed to our communities. And then the one that we're mostly excited about right now, the one that is current, is the partnership between Starry and Microsoft to come to our communities and provide the infrastructure needed for connectivity. And the way that they bring that connectivity is they bring that connectivity with point-to-point connectivity from areas of high rises that are around our community. They bring in that connectivity to the middle of that community and then disperse that through wired connectivity that actually goes into the units, which is really the ultimate goal. If we're going to talk about connectivity, we really want wired connectivity into the unit as much as possible. We've tried so many different ways to get access and connectivity internal to these communities. This is the best way, but there is a big challenge. This program is serving 8 communities. We have 14. What do we do about the other 6 communities? What options do we have? And even if this chart that shows we're bringing in connectivity to 8 communities, even then the connectivity ratio, in other words, families being able to afford, being able to look towards this offering and then sign up, it's limited to around 30% across the board. We have programs that are trying to drive that connectivity forward through education and just a word of mouth, and also a program that we have that is called Digital Ambassadors, where we empower residents and community leaders to embrace technology and show others the outcome and to help them embrace that as well. But some of the challenges here, and I know we're going to talk about, well, what do we want to do next? What are some of the ideas? Even though we have 65% of our communities that have the infrastructure, only about a third of those communities, as I stated, are really taking advantage of that. We need to move that forward. We need to educate them. We need to help them be able to afford it. But even then, that leaves about 5,000 families not connected. And what do we do? What do we do about being able to connect them? It is such a challenge. You know, when we try to provide public housing to these families to help them thrive, to help them get a boost to their situation, you know, they don't know that really by moving into public housing, they're going to move into a digital desert, because in these areas, fiber is not coming. We've talked to many different service providers, and that's not really in their rollout plan. Fiber is going elsewhere. And so what do we do with this family when they need connectivity for their children, when they have 2 to 3 children and they try to do homework at home? data or no. These structures are so challenging. They're like Faraday boxes, someone said one time. They have barred windows, barred doors, they have thick center block walls. How do we get wireless connectivity even in there? That's why the preference is to have wired connectivity. And for that, what do? Every time we've tried to talk to service providers on an individual basis, or try to establish these partnerships, even through the ones that have been brought about through Connect Home, we're still having one-on-one discussions about single communities at a time. What can we do? What type of assistance can we get so that we can have more of a, maybe a bargaining, not so much a bargaining power, but being able to bring that and really standardize this need in such a way that connectivity is looked upon as a utility. At this point, it's really talked about more as an amenity in many different ways. And, it's almost as this is a nice to have and not a must have. But that's nothing these families can do. They can't rebuild these units. These units were up to code at the time. And, they are now with the challenge that even wiring can be expensive to get into these units. But newer units don't have this challenge. It just sort of comes with. Wiring is already included in the design. It is part of the build, but not for these units. What can we do to make data connectivity more of a utility in the regs than an amenity? Another thing that I think it's a big opportunity is the per unit cost. We've seen that through the Department of Technology of the state and other bigger agencies, as they work with service providers, they're able to standardize a particular rate for services. Can that be brought about to talk about the standard rate to connect a public housing unit? Can we get some guidance and some assistance with that so that we're not trying to negotiate with a service provider on a particular area on a one-on-one basis? And oftentimes those conversations, really don't lead to the connectivity and to the solutions that we need. Are there also other technology solutions? We've seen other housing authorities experiment with high voltage wiring, leveraging the wiring for the lights to be able to get the connectivity into the units. Can we explore something like that? Can we establish a partnership to be able to explore that, since that wiring is there already? Consistency and funding is so key. When we rolled out these early projects, you give a family a Windows 7 device, which at the time is the latest you can give them. A few years later, that's obsolete. Same thing with connectivity. You give them 3 to 4 megs. A few years after that, that's not even considered high-speed internet anymore. And so, the need grows. So funding, the sustainability of these programs, as we embrace and provide such hope for these families, as we tell them about connectivity and how much better their life's going to be because of it. If it's not sustained, it creates a vacuum as where they become dependent on this, and then all of a sudden they can no longer afford it, or it gets pulled under the rug, or their devices and connectivity are no longer sufficient. In regards to the conversation with ISPs, I think the conversation about fiber is probably one of those conversations that we'll be very interested to talk about, or leveraging some of the wireless, wired, maybe 5G technology that's coming about. So that's a little bit from our side. Hopefully this can trigger some ideas into the conversation. Very happy to speak to anybody about any questions, particularly to the Housing Authority.
Yeah, thank you, Luis. And you are setting the table for 3 of the 4 major conversations that we want to have by the end of today. So, by the way, we're very proud to be your partner in the redevelopment of Rancho San Pedro. And so we're excited about that project. So thank you very much. And it also, Paul, I put up one of our San Diego properties in Canto Village just for you. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Paul Morris, the Director of Project Management, Office Information Technology Department for the San Diego Housing Commission. Paul.
Thank you, Steve. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Please let me know if you can't see it. Okay, everybody can see it. Great, I can see it too. Again, my name's Paul Morris. I'm the Director for the Project Management Office for the San Diego Housing Commission. I have a team that we've been working on this since February of this year, and I'm going to introduce them backwards to forwards, and then we're going to walk through our slides and share the high-level information that we've been collecting over the last 8 months. So I will have John Rios, Director of Integrated Strategy, speaking last about partnerships. I have George Williams on. He is the Director of Compliance and Equity Assurance. We'll be talking about the equity lens as part of our project work. And then to start us off is going to be Jennifer McKinney. She's our Vice President of Property Management. And with that, trying to keep within the time, I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Paul, and good afternoon, everyone. We're thrilled to be here. Before we jump in and my colleagues and I share our efforts to date and what we have on the horizon, similar to Luis, we thought it might be helpful to give a brief overview of the Housing Commission portfolio for context. So the Housing Commission does indeed have a diverse real estate portfolio, north of 2,400 affordable housing units. These are spread among 150 properties in the city of San Diego. Interestingly, only 189 units are part of the public housing program. The remainder are deed restricted for low-income households at or below 80% of AMI. Approximately half of these households are further subsidized by housing choice vouchers. In addition, the portfolio is diverse in unit type. We have single-family homes, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, SROs, and we have a handful of medium or large size multifamily garden style communities. The properties are scattered throughout the city of San Diego, from the border to about 50 miles north to Del Mar, from the beach communities, and probably 15 miles inland. So they're, again, very scattered site element to the Housing Commission portfolio. And we also have, as I mentioned, many smaller properties, many that are 10 to 12 units in size. And with that, we lack some of the community space that larger properties traditionally have. We do have a couple of computer labs at some of the larger communities, but regardless, we find that there's still a lack of technical support to go along with that type of amenity. And before I move on, I just want to say how much I appreciate Luis just stating the reference to internet as a utility and not an amenity. So I'll stand corrected on that point. Housing Commission has been exploring this for a bit. What we found is not so much the implementation or the infrastructure, but ongoing funding. So for us, our revenue pays for our operating expenses. And with that, we have a pretty lean operating budget, and furthermore, concerns about long-term sustainability. So that's been a concern. Furthermore, any additional revenue or excess revenue left over, net operating income, funds some of our agency's other endeavors and activities. So it goes without saying that it's been a competing priority for us, which I'm sure several on the call can relate to. So this year we conducted a survey amongst our residents, and I'm going to turn it over to Paul again to have him cover the results of that survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. For the slides. There we go. So as Jennifer mentioned, we ended up sending out a paper survey to all of the residents under the San Diego Housing Commission. We've put together some really great reports on it. Obviously, my concern was loading time for a Tableau report on this presentation. So I compiled it down into a few bullets. And basically, majority of our home subscriptions, majority use home subscriptions for service providers such as Cox and AT&T. The biggest concern we found across the board was the costs were ranging anywhere from $50 a month to over $200 a month for broadband services in those residents. Majority of our residents use cell phones to access the internet because cell phones are easier to access, easier mobility, and the fact that the other equipment for them to have at home was too much expensive for them to have. So what we also found in our residential survey was that the majority of our residents are using it for online banking, government services, and to connect to family and friends. The issue that we come across is that the income for majority of the residents at the properties for the San Diego Housing Commission is $15,000 or less per year. So as you can see, when it comes down to a choice between paying pricey internet services versus buying food or paying for rent or other needs, this is one of those things that gets put on the side and is not a choice because of the level of costs. The other thing that we found out in our survey that we did over the summer is that the age of our residents that are looking at and have issues around the internet connectivity is those that are 60 plus. And the other concerns that were brought up through what we collected in our residential survey was accessibility, both in language accessibility and for those that had poor vision concerns on accessing information online. The other big hits we heard from folks is their concern on online security and wanting to access training, which is one of the programs that we're actually talking and been in a partnership now with one of the local organizations. So those are the highlights. For anybody that would like to gather more information or hear more information about it, please reach out to me. I think my email address has already been shared, and I'd be more than happy to share more information about the depth of the survey that we did. So I am now going to turn it over to George Williams, our Director of Compliance and Equity Assurance, and he's going to talk a little bit about the equity lens that we're including as part of this project. George, all yours.
Thank you, Paul. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is George Williams, and I'm the Director of Compliance and Equity Assurance with the San Diego Housing Commission. Now, just to give you a little bit of background about this particular division, in October 2020, executive leadership gave direction to design, develop, and implement an equity assurance initiative that actively supports equity and inclusion in the Commission's existing and future programs, policies, activities, and practices. And so a major component of that work is to apply an equity lens before finalizing decisions so that we ensure that we're asking ourselves the questions that will make us think about being equitable and inclusive in every aspect of our work and interactions. And since this is a new initiative, one of the first steps we needed to take to stand up the division is to partner with others who are also doing this work. So we became members of the Government Alliance on Race and Equity. This is a national network that offers a professional peer-to-peer network that enables government equity directors or leads and subject area experts to exchange information, to collaborate to advance their practices, and to develop solutions to equity challenges. And so through this membership, we were able to connect with other entities and established a relationship with the city of Long Beach, who had already implemented a digital inclusion program. And so through this relationship with Long Beach, we were able to share best practice information, which in turn led to the development of our residential survey, which was touched upon earlier. The equity team did review the survey through an equity lens and provided recommendations prior to the release. And so finally, the division is in the process of launching some really great things. One of those being a website, and some of the key components on that website is to include information about the Digital Divide Initiative, as well as digital inclusion community resources, such as multilingual resource guides, low-cost internet service providers, affordable computer resources, possibly free computer literacy training services, and locations such as libraries and parks that offer free public Wi-Fi and computer access. And with that, I'll turn it over to John Rios, who will be discussing partnerships and funding.
Thank you, George. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Rios. I'm the Director of Integrated Strategies for the San Diego Housing Commission. As we know, and as we've heard throughout this presentation, securing funding for any project can present a variety of challenges, even more so when those projects require ongoing costs and the need for them to become self-sustainable at some point. The San Diego Housing Commission is currently focusing on expanding some of our existing community partnerships, as well as leveraging some of these collaborations in order to serve our clients and tenants in a more focused and enhanced manner. This is a critical step in the effort to ensure that we're affording every opportunity to improve the digital equity and inclusion effort. As we've heard from many people here today, partnerships and collaborations are a must. Aside from working with broadband providers like the ones we've heard, Cox and AT&T, in order to create the infrastructure to offer the access at an affordable rate to our clients, tenants, in the community at large, we're currently collaborating with local nonprofits, the San Diego Office of Education, and the city through the local public libraries to develop a menu of services that will provide training and education to those around it, to those that need it. So what good is broadband internet without training and education around it to understand how to really access and use it to serve your needs? Everything from internet browsing basics, internet safety, emailing 101, device tutorials, and access to those devices to extended training and technology fairs for those looking for advanced learning options are some of the workshops and training and education opportunities we're currently working on, really to kind of bring them to our residents at some of the properties that we manage as part of our effort to close the digital divide. Furthermore, we're currently seeking funding to assist with equipment availability, trainings, different kind of offerings and low cost access to support this effort. Having the ability to collaborate and have existing partnerships will really spread the resources, as well as demonstrate to potential funders that it's a community effort and that there are multiple stakeholders in this space. Thank you all for your time. I'm really excited to see what we're able to accomplish through these efforts, and I will turn it back over to Paul to close us out.
Thank you, John. I'd just like to thank Jennifer and George and John for making the time to assist with this. And I really am just thankful for not only this team at the Housing Commission, but also for being invited to this workshop and sharing. So I'll turn it back over to you, Steve.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And once again, a ton of great information. All right, Walter and Michael, I'm going to ask you guys to land us within the next 10 minutes. So it gives me pleasure to introduce Walter Beaumont, who's with one of our fellow nonprofit housers in Ventura County, the grants manager from Cabrillo EDC. Mr. Beaumont.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And on behalf of the board and our CEO, Margarita Descontrillas, I want to thank SCAG for inviting us to be participating today. I want to say hello to Jenna Hornstock, a fellow colleague of mine at the city, and hope that she's doing well as say hi to Victoria Brady and Luz Soto, who are CDEDC staff members that are joining us today. So our perspective as a nonprofit housing developer and manager based in Ventura County is a little bit different than the public housing sector folks that you've heard from before. We don't have many of the challenges that you've heard before. We're very fortunate in that manner, but we do have some partnership models that we are starting to look at. So just to give you a little bit of background on CEDC, we're celebrating our 40th anniversary this year. Our legacy comes from the farm worker movement, where we had some families that were being forced with eviction that banded together and purchased their house. They were able to get funding to do that, and then created the CEDC some years later. I want to invite everyone to a special event that we're having. It's free, it's a webinar. It's entitled The Future of Affordable Housing. It's going to happen on Wednesday, November 17th at 11 a.m. And we're going to feature as our guest speaker the current Secretary of Business, Consumer Services and Housing for the state of California. That is Secretary Lourdes Castro Ramirez, and she's going to talk. And I understand that she was a former Cabrillo employee. So if I see Crystal's put that in the chat, you're all welcome. We hope to see you there on Wednesday. Anyways, we have 25 properties here at Cabrillo that are spread throughout the county of Ventura. Now, the county of Ventura has less than 900,000 people in the entire county, so it's not a very populated area. And most of our properties are located in the more rural section, the western Ventura County. And we've got properties in places like Fillmore, Santa Paula, Piru, and Ojai. These are the properties that are mostly farm workers, but of the 1,237 units with the 3,800 residents, all of our units are all of our residents earn less than 80% of AMI. So we've got all of our properties connected to the internet and have Wi-Fi, but most of the properties do not provide that service to the residents. We use the internet and Wi-Fi for our business operations, and 16 of these properties do have computer labs. And this is where we really get the value of having this internet high-speed connection. We have something called Resident Community Services, which is part of our property management department, and they provide the services to our residents that give social services. And let me just tell you what are the things that we do here. We have English second language. We provide tutoring for students. We have a summer educational program. We have college scholarships that we provide, early childhood literacy. There's health and nutrition classes as well as wellness classes. We have food pantries, tax preparation assistance, financial literacy courses, stress management, disease management prevention, as well as citizenship classes. And the biggest challenge right now for CEDC is really not the connectivity, but finding the resources to sustain and expand these programs. So since most of our programs are in person and mainly follow health and education issues, we see that our priority right now would be maybe to work with local education and see about we can expand some of our access and provide better access to some of the properties that don't have computer labs. So maybe we could work with school districts, community and four-year colleges in expanding that access. The other thing is really our main priority at this point is trying to come back from the pandemic and coping with post-pandemic challenges. We're having staffing issues here at the organization, trying to find qualified people that want to work. We've got mental health issues at some of our properties. So we've got a case management staff that goes out to work with them on that. We've got an economy that's still not 100% back, leaving many of our residents and other people in our county that are vulnerable to evictions. We've got inflation now that's coming on the scene, and all the lost opportunities because of the pandemic. So we see that really as our primary goal. We'd like to work with some of the, like I said, educational institutions to see if we can get that up and running, and certainly work with our ISPs. The #1 ISP provider for Cabrillo is Time Warner, and the range of what we pay monthly varies greatly, but the service tends to be pretty good. So in that sense, we're very lucky. And that concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Walter. And it gives me pleasure to introduce another one of our partners, Mike Walsh, the Deputy Director of the Housing Authority of the County of Riverside. Mike.
Thank you, everyone, for this time. Again, my name is Mike Walsh. I'm as part of the county's Housing and Workforce Solutions Division, and that encompasses both the Housing Authority, the Continuum of Care, the Community Action Partnership, Workforce Development, as well as Housing Development, all under one roof. And so we have a much smaller housing authority about our former publicly owned housing sites. We're just 469 units, and most of these are really small sites that they don't have on-site computer labs or those sort of facilities. And at the start of the pandemic, we were looking at using a portion of the CARES Act dollars to connect everyone up to high-speed internet to the extent possible. So we went out and, similar to what was done in San Diego, and surveyed residents. What was the issues there? Were they lacking connectivity, lacking internet access? And the vast majority all did have internet access at their locations. And so even though we were like, well, maybe if we offer it for free, but then we were concerned with basically the long-term costs associated with that. Even if we had money to pay for it in the short run, what happens when that subsidy dollars goes away if we're already at the maximum amount of rents able to be charged, and how does that, who assumes a long-term obligation associated with that? But it's something that we're like looking at as we've been seeing it rolling out of other programs. Our division has taken on the rollout of the Emergency Rental Assistance Program for the county. And what we found is that roughly 70% of people that accessed the website, our unitedlift.org website, were accessing it from a smartphone. And so so how are we basically delivering services in a way that's most responsive to the residents? That how are people are engaging on those different pieces there? And then we often partner with developers like National Core, Coachella Valley Housing Coalition, Palm Communities, and others. And on those sites, they have oftentimes have computer labs there, and they will be partnering with other nonprofits to provide services. In the Eastern Coachella Valley, the Coachella Valley Unified School District, and provided hotspots to the students in order for them to have access. And what the school district found is that wasn't just being used by the students, but also by the family and other sort of members in those places. They also innovated by placing hotspots on buses, and they would park buses in some of the more remote areas to develop connectivity. But it's spotty internet service, and it's not great. A mobile home park where we just secured a Home Key Award for that, they didn't even wire for putting the conduit to place internet there, that everyone was using satellite internet services there because the service providers weren't necessarily being delivered. And so I would say what I think is interesting, sometimes we make a lot of assumptions about those that are living in these housing developments. And I remember years ago, I was teaching English as a second language at an affordable housing site in Mecca, California, farm worker community. And one of the family members invited me back home to their unit. They give me some food because I was too skinny at the time. And so I go into the room, and then they're on Skype with relatives in Mexico. And it was the first time I'd ever saw anyone talking to another person on a phone or a computer like we're doing right now. And I think and that was only made possible because that housing development had connectivity to internet and those sort of things. And I can say for the affordable housing development groups like Cabrillo and National Core and others that are providing this level of service, that when we make it available, families take advantage of it, and that they are able to make the connections to stay connected to their family members locally, access better employment. And I think, again, while we're trying to roll out all of these different programs from rental assistance and legal aid, telemedicine, it's an assumption that we have okay, if we put it online, it's easy for everyone to access it. And what we found with rental assistance rollout, we were still having to go out and do pop-up events at community rooms across the county to do the rollout of those services. And so I think we need to make sure that we're delivering the services and manners, and we're looking as a county on how we bring internet more closely to these residents, how we partner with school districts, and do all the work that all the other folks have mentioned today to deliver in a small way possible. But I appreciate the opportunity. I'm trying to stay on time. So thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And our goal is, obviously for the internet service providers, some of the agencies, to just hear what's going on in the minds of housers in order to be able to set the table for the dialogue. So I'm going to jump right into the provider side of the equation. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Carolyn Mcintyre, the CEO of the California Cable and Telecommunications Association. Carolyn.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to participate. I also appreciate having heard from the various housing authorities, the programs they have or some of the challenges that they face in making sure that the residents are connected. CCTA and our member companies, we are long supporters of ensuring that there is both broadband deployment in public housing, either through our members coming in and making private investments in order to wire or upgrade those facilities, and also have been supportive of programs like the California Advanced Services Fund program in making grants available for the deployment of broadband into these housing complexes when you don't have a private provider that is prepared to provide that service. That said, I've also been educated over the years that oftentimes just because the service is there doesn't mean that the residents can afford to take it. I'm also informed that the reduced cost broadband service offerings that are offered by CCTA's members often are not reduced cost enough for that particular population. That said, that resulted in CCTA actually sponsored legislation this past year that was specifically focused on public housing. We did amend that towards the end of the session to expand that to include farm worker housing into the bill as well. But that bill was held in committee. But the purpose of the bill was to allow funding from the California Advanced Services Fund, or quite frankly, from any other source the state of California could make available to provide for connectivity, not infrastructure, connectivity in the form of broadband adoption service, broadband adoption courses, digital literacy service, and for the actual provision of the broadband service. Again, that bill was held in committee, as was another public housing bill that I believe CETF was sponsoring. So that's unfortunate. Included, however, in SB 156 was a program that is being called the Low Income Communities Program that the CPUC now has authorization to design and spend money on. So our hope is that public housing will be included as a part of that process. If it isn't, we are also supportive, however, of making very specific funding sources available to cover the service, digital literacy, and equipment part of the equation. So we look forward to a partnership to make that happen, either through advocating before the Public Utilities Commission or in the form of sponsorship of additional legislation.
Couldn't find my unmute button, so thank you very much, Carolyn.
Absolutely.
And we're very fortunate to actually have the Advanced Services Fund on the phone with us today. So we're going to be able to have some specific conversations about that.
Great.
Looking forward to it. So it gives me pleasure to also introduce Christine Moore, the Executive Director of External Affairs for AT&T. Christine.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to echo Carolyn's comments. This is a great opportunity for us to hear from folks in the field who are doing the work, and this is important information for us to take back and share statewide with my colleagues. So thank you for this opportunity. We are happy part of the solution. We very much want to have a seat at the table for this conversation. So we appreciate being here today, and we look forward to continued conversations on how to address this very important issue. We deliver connectivity via fiber and wireless solutions to residential properties all over the country. And we are proud to build and maintain this network with a professional and union represented workforce. And I want to give a shout out to Chris with 9511 CWA on the call. I saw him earlier. So thank you for your work in keeping Californians connected. We also support digital literacy via funding, beyond the technological connections. We also support digital literacy via funding to CBOs, and I see many of them are on the call today. But I'll give you some examples locally here in San Diego. We've worked with the Parent Institute for Quality Education in efforts to reach out to English language learner parents. That's been a population that has been significantly impacted by the pandemic. Their struggles to, not just get connected, but to also embrace the new way of communication with their educators and their children's schools. We work with, for example, another great group, Promises to Kids. They are working sort of a similar effort to kids, but they're working with a specific population of foster parents who perhaps on Monday didn't have a young person in the house, and then Tuesday they do have a young person in the house. And given that districts all have different programmings and different ways to communicate with parents and to do lesson planning and learning, they have to sometimes very quickly jump in and understand how that foster child can best stay engaged in their schooling in what is admittedly a very difficult transition. So those are just two examples locally here in San Diego of digital literacy and outreach that we've been working on. I'm really proud of that. And we've done some substantial gifts to those two organizations. And what's been great to see is that BK, for example, has now rolled out that English language learner program across California. They're doing some great work in Central Valley here, particularly in Fresno. And they are now actually rolling out that, that programming nationwide. So, it's just great to see that it started here in California, and, we're proud to support the good work that those groups are doing. I also want to acknowledge Hassan and Antoinette and the SANDAG team. We were serving on their Digital Divide Task Force as well. That was a great opportunity to hear locally about the work that needs to be done in this space, and to be able to share information back on the challenges that we see as ISPs in rolling out, a more robust network to respond to the pandemic. And so I think that probably is a good place for me to stop, but I'm available if there's any other comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. And then Allison Ellis, the Senior Vice President of Regulatory and Government Affairs for Frontier. Allison.
Hi, Steve. Thanks very much for inviting me to participate in this panel as well. As with the other participants, it's really been valuable to listen to the public housing folks and really understanding the challenges from their perspective. And certainly we know from Frontier's perspective what some of those challenges are. We absolutely agree that for many families, including those that are in public housing, that the connectivity that's in place today is just simply not enough. We've seen that, throughout the pandemic, that it's really important to have a very high-speed, robust connection in order to do remote working, remote schooling, and really continue to contribute to the economy. We at Frontier are very focused on fiber deployment, fiber to the premises deployment. We've announced a corporate goal of deploying fiber to the premises to 10 million locations by the end of 2025. In the context of our recent restructuring, we committed to deploying 350,000 locations with fiber to the premises by the end of 2026. And we expect that to be in a mix of communities, including those that are in historically underserved populations like those in public housing. In terms of actually doing that deployment, there are some unique or specific challenges with public housing units, particularly in ones that are older and that have quite a number of units. The existing facilities that are there oftentimes aren't robust enough to support very high-speed services. There may be access issues into each particular unit. Sometimes there's access issues into the building. And so that is certainly somewhere where we see as Frontier, as we look to navigate those issues, that there's an opportunity for partnership, both with the public housing unit and then with the city to, help address some of those issues. I think, in the context of, we've participated in CASF before and secured grants. We expect to continue to do that. We have worked in partnership with CETF, regional consortiums, CBOs. We expect to continue to do that. I think there's a big opportunity for all of us with the additional CASF funding and also the federal funding that is coming for connectivity to really partner to address some of these issues. We have talked a bit about affordability, and I think that's also another area where we should all really be focusing. We, like our peer companies, we have low income offers, and and there's often the feedback that they're not low enough, and we hear that. I think the EBB is a good test case. So if folks, I'm sure, are familiar with that, that's the federal benefit that was enacted in response to the pandemic that essentially provides $50 credit towards qualifying broadband service. And what I think industry everywhere has seen is that while that's available and makes very high speed service, essentially free for customers, there hasn't been quite as much adoption of services as you would expect, given that it's free for qualifying families. The bipartisan broadband infrastructure bill contemplates making this EBB permanent at a level that's not quite where it is now, $30, but still that would help subsidize a very robust internet connection. I think that's another place where we can partner with the public housing and other community organizations to really help drive the adoption of fiber services where they're available, broadband services where they're available. So those are some of the particular challenges that we see with serving public housing communities. We absolutely are committed to meeting that need. However, we believe that everyone should have access to fiber services. Everyone should have access to a gig. And as that expands to 2 gig and 3 gig and whatever's coming down the road 5 and 10 years from now, we want to be part of that solution for families, particularly those that have been historically underserved for a whole host of reasons.
So thank you, Allison. I think that's a great setting the table, because that's a big part of the conversation that we want to try and figure out. So we're going to take a breath. Everybody take a breath, because that was a lot. And we want to have the opportunity to make sure there have been questions that are put into the chat. I want to give the opportunity if there are any other questions. Some of the specifics because the next part of the panel is hearing from HUD, HCD, and the PUC. And so, what we've heard is Luis has challenges getting fiber through thick concrete block walls in old public housing developments. We have the concern about the current cost of accessing, even though there may be some short-term funding. What's the sustainability of that funding over time? We have, I think Allison also just reinforced the point about making sure that the technology continues to improve as technology improves. So it's not just a one-time fix, but a continuing investment in capabilities, speeds, et cetera, as we continue to go forward. We have heard about the digital literacy issues. We have talked, interestingly enough, about there may be funding out there, but I could just share with you, and I didn't take time to talk about National Core, but one of the challenges, and we have a whole team of resident services folks that work with our residents and help them apply for things. But when the individual resident has to apply for the EBB funds, and you think about an organization like us that has over 8,000 families living in our properties, that's not an insignificant challenge to work with them all, versus the ability to apply on behalf of a property as a whole. Maybe there's some opportunities along there. So let me just pause. Before we hear from Dina, thoughts, additional questions to put on the table, or Crystal or Roland, did I miss any of the big concepts?
No, but we do have, this is Roland, we do have some questions for Luis. If you'd like me to read them out loud.
Sure.
Sure. So the first question is from Aaron Baum of SBC COG. Was Starry solicited through an RFP process? Can the group get a copy that could be used as a template for last mile connectivity into low income housing? At the end of the day, what is the service level that Starry partnership will provide within the home?
So the short answer is there was no RFP. This is a sort of a pilot that Starry started back on the East Coast. And as they were perfecting their model, they were looking to extend the options over to us. And we started discussing their availability in the Los Angeles area. As they were expanding their private market options, we wanted to keep discussing public housing options that were close to where their market was increasing, so that we could get a point-to-point connection from one of the areas that we're covering into our area. So it was a relationship that developed over time. In regards to the rates, I'm going to pull that up here. There were a few offers to onboard. Families were given 6 months for free, and it's $15 to get 30 megs. I think those 6 months free may have been extended because of the pandemic. They could get a different tier at $50 per month for 20 megs.
There's another question for you as well. Can one use a microwave link up for backhaul and drop a wire down to the MPoE and then run Wi-Fi throughout the building?
We've tried that in many models and it's not sufficient. So the idea is to bring a internet link into the middle of a community, have a wire to the closet that all the all the buildings have. But there is no hallway that we have. All the units face outward. And when we've put repeaters around units, that signal just cannot get through with the level of speed that we need into the unit. So as I've walked inside the units with families, they'll have connectivity in one bedroom, but not the kitchen, not the living room, maybe in the bathroom, maybe one bathroom you can get good signal and not the other. It's a tough situation trying to get through in an equitable way with a high speed and the reliability they need.
Okay, great. I will get to, there's a question for Allison, but there is a quick follow-up for you again, Luis. Regarding the internet connection, is it 30 Mbps down as well as up?
No, I think it's only down.
Okay. And then a question for Allison. You mentioned that adoption hasn't been what might be expected. Essentially, it's free. If this isn't about infrastructure or access, then how or who should be at the point for selling or bridging this gap?
If I understand the question, I think the question is really how do we address that adoption issue? And I think that's a very difficult question that we all have a role to play in. I think, what we have seen in our work with CETF, we worked with them to deploy 50,000 Chromebooks. We were able to deploy nearly 20,000 of them in the last year to school children in high-need school districts. That was by far the most effective strategy for us because we partnered with a local trusted entity, the school system, CETF, and we were able to empower them to identify those families that they felt were in need of the Chromebook. And so that is, I think, where we all are most successful is when we tap into what are the local community resources that people trust to say, this is of value to you. We will help you get this. We will teach you how to use it. We will help you find, support funding for it. Because there are a lot of subsidy supports existing today, whether it's through Lifeline or other programs, and they're not there. We all know there's still a community of people who just don't use wired broadband because they don't understand how it's different than mobile broadband and how important that higher level of connectivity is. So that's, what I think it's going to take very close partnership. It's going to take very, direct and affirmative work by all of us. I think, I mentioned the bipartisan broadband framework which is called the IIJA. I really hope that passes. That has a lot of funding in it for adoption as well. And so, I think that would be an opportunity to really pilot some projects to see what works best and then replicate that from place to place.
Let me, if I could just piggyback on that, and maybe I'm going to ask Greg from my team to pipe in, but there's not the funding for the interpreter service providers working with the residents to get them signed up. And so that's a part of the challenge is, if there's a way to think about, when we do it for the residents in our property, we're just doing it, using other funding sources to pay the people that are working with the residents in order to get things signed up. But Greg, do you have any thoughts about, how to be able to get, residents at scale to take advantage of funding for internet? Just to put you on the spot.
No, that's great. Hey, Steve. It's a great question. And, I'll tell you, what we find repeatedly is that, the individual contact with our residents becomes really important. So the at scale question is a really good one. Obviously, through various communication methods, we still find old school, and it sounds so old school to me, but, individual outreach, door knocking, flyers, that kind of thing is what, connects with our residents. I think that will continue to be needed for the time being. But I think the other piece too is thinking about how do we work through kind of resident networks of kind of influence, that neighbors talking about neighbors and families talking to families as well. So if we can equip, those who can take advantage of these services to share them with others who are like them, I think could be a powerful strategy as well.
Cool. All right, Roland, if there's one more question, otherwise I'd like to roll into the next panel.
No more questions.
All right. So now we get to have answers. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dina Lehman Kim, Program Manager, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, Office of Public and Indian Housing. Dina.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here today with all of you and to hear all this great conversation. It's really music to my ears, to be honest with you. For a long time, I have said it takes a village to do this work. And I want to thank you all for bringing focus to public housing, residents and other publicly assisted housing people. I think oftentimes our residents, the people I think about every day, get forgotten in this conversation. So really, thank you so much for doing this. I'm going to share my screen. And I also, as I'm doing that, would like to thank Sunny for her leadership. It's been a joy and an honor to know you for the past several years. And also to the organizers of this really important event today. And it's also very gratifying to see ISPs. You're a very important part of this puzzle. So I was asked to talk about challenges and opportunities, and I think I'm going to talk about opportunities first. And Allison from Frontier, you set me up really well. Can you guys see my screen? Yes. Okay. Yes. I don't know why. Oh, there we go. Okay. So opportunities. I think now, because of the pandemic, if there is a silver lining in this pandemic, it's pretty much everyone knows now why connectivity is important. We don't really have to explain it anymore. As a result of this new understanding, HUD issued new flexibilities in the use of public housing operating funds to cover in-unit internet expenses. So I've heard earlier on the point about making the internet a utility in terms of the allowances for utility allowance out of the operating fund. It's come up several times. I can tell you that HUD has not moved in that direction yet. Doesn't mean we won't move in that direction. I think it has been raised to HUD leadership, and I think conversations are happening. But what I would say is there is, a finite pot in the operating subsidy. And so, if the internet was considered a utility, it would subtract from that overall pot, which, as I'm sure our housing authorities know, there's a lot of competing needs for those funds and, not a huge amount of money. So the good news, though, is that if a housing authority chose to, they could use their operating funds to cover in-unit internet costs. And that is new. That's very, very new. Also on the HUD front, I'd like to just let you all know, in case you don't, that the Community Development Block Grant Program and its companion Section 108 Loan Guarantee Program can be used for a wide variety of broadband purposes. And so I will be happy to share a presentation that those offices did 2 weeks ago for our Connect Home USA Summit, and that will walk you through in more detail. I'm not in that office, so I'm not an expert on those programs, but I do want to make sure you knew about that. And the staff is very willing to help you understand how to put those programs to use to support broadband. Another thing is this unprecedented unprecedented level of current federal funding through the American Rescue Plan and FY21 appropriation. So we talked about, Allison mentioned the emergency broadband benefit. There is 3.2 billion, and yes, it has been challenging to get folks to sign up for that. What I would say is that it had to be stood up very, very fast. So yeah, it is sort of clumsy, the application process. Sometimes it's a two-step process. HUD actually is part of the National Verifier System. So we have an agreement with USAC, the Universal Service Administrative Company that administers Lifeline and EBB, to verify eligibility by virtue of an applicant's residence in public housing or having a Section 8 voucher. So that at least should speed things along a little bit. But yes, there are still issues. To the question earlier about how can we help residents to take more full advantage of this opportunity, I think training digital ambassadors to help other residents understand how to do this. It of course doesn't happen overnight, but residents are trusted by other residents, and this is, a wonderful opportunity to help residents who may need other skills to put on their resume. A digital ambassador program is excellent, and this could be a great way to help spread the word and get more people signed up. Also, in case you don't know, FCC also had a huge infusion of funding, a $7.1 billion for the Emergency Connectivity Fund, and that is an expansion of the E-rate program that goes to schools and libraries. This allows, unlike the regular E-rate program, is the way I understand it, this allows libraries and schools to loan connected devices to their patrons. So that's a great thing. And if, I would suggest working with your schools and libraries to make sure that your residents are benefiting from that. Open Now is also the Connecting Minority Communities pilot program. So this focus is more for minority serving institutions, MSIs like HBCUs, for example. However, I do want to stress that consortiums can apply. So if a PHA has a nonprofit arm, you can work with your local, let's say HBCU or tribal college to apply. And applications are due in December 1st. So that could be an opportunity. And again, having you all here together at the table will set you up for success in future funding. But before I get there, let me talk about Treasury. So Treasury, for the first time, has money that can cover broadband. The Capital Projects Fund is $10 billion to aid in COVID-19 response. This funding is going to states. So I would highly recommend, tapping into that and seeing how, broadband can be funded. It can be funded, but, just figure out how you can tap into that. Also, state and local recovery funds cover broadband costs. So there's $350 billion there, which will be available until 2024. And then on the horizon, so we know this Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has passed the Senate. It hasn't passed the House. So maybe it's a good idea to contact your representatives. I don't know. But there's $65 billion there. Of that, $2.75 billion is for the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. And that's really what we're talking about here today, is getting our residents connected to the internet and the skills they need, the devices they need. There's within the bill, it also allows for the building or the upgrades of computer labs, which we all know are important to training residents for understanding and fully adopting the internet. Also in this bill is the State Digital Equity Capacity Grant. And this would provide funding for planning, which is what you guys are doing now, and implementation. There's a lot of money in there for this. So if this passes, hopefully it will, you already have a head start. There's a lot of money also for middle mile infrastructure, the affordable connectivity program, which Allison had alluded to, that would replace the EBB program. And there are other provisions in this section of the bill as well that cover anti-discrimination and the broadband labeling, like your nutrition label. There's provisions for those things as well. And the other item I wanted to mention, which is not in any of these funding packages, is the Community Reinvestment Act. So banks, they get evaluated on how well they invest in low and moderate income communities. And a few years ago, the guidance that covers the CRA was updated to allow broadband related investments. Now, banks, as I understand it, tend to usually fund the things they've always gotten credit for. So if you're trying to approach a bank, you may have to do some education, and all of these things that are in blue are links, so that I've connected you to very detailed guidance from the Federal Reserve that will walk you through how you can use the CRA and how you can approach a bank. Folks mentioned working with school districts. School districts have big bank accounts, so maybe partner with your school district to see how you can leverage their accounts with the Community Reinvestment Act to help you bring more broadband investments to your community. And the other thing I would say in terms of future-facing benefits, we know that connected communities can lower a PHA's operational costs. So I'll take the example of NYCHA. They automated rental payments and the annual recertification process. That saved them tens of thousands of dollars on a monthly basis. So that's a huge savings. The other thing to think about, is forward-looking, is energy efficiency. So smart thermostats and appliances. And then, if we're looking really ahead into the future, somebody also mentioned smart cities, the smart grid, Internet of Things. We're preparing our communities for the 21st century, for innovation and for helping our residents succeed in the 21st century and helping our communities be energy efficient as well. In terms of challenges, we've talked about the cost, of course, the cost of the internet itself, devices, and of training also. Lack of competition, I think we all know about that. And in terms of sort of at the micro level, through Connect Home, what we've found is, lack of staff to coordinate digital inclusion work across all of the organizations that it takes to build a strong digital inclusion program. You definitely need a quarterback or a conductor. And then also lack of tech support to help residents. That's definitely a challenge. And finally, I was asked to talk about some successes. So in general, key ingredients are PHA with a strong partnership with the city, and as I mentioned, a quarterback or a conductor to sort of lead this work and make sure all of the trains are moving on time. I'll just talk about a few of these. The Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, one of our first Connect Home communities, works with 3 ISPs to bring low cost and sometimes free internet to 10 counties that constitutes their reservation. They have 3 staff members that coordinate all of the different components. Englewood, Colorado approached Starry and said, I know you're already working in Denver. We're not too far. Can you please come by and check us out? And Starry did. And they installed the necessary infrastructure to provide free community space, Wi-Fi, and also in-unit, $15 a month in-unit service. And then some of our communities have used CARES Act funding to bring either fiber or a Wi-Fi network to their properties. And other PHAs have entered into bulk purchase agreements with T-Mobile for 2 years of service and tablets. But I would like to also acknowledge our communities have worked with AT&T and Comcast and Cox and other ISPs very successfully. So with that, I think that's it. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dina. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think on target with a number of those challenges. And it's kind of that the interface between the end user and the services that are out there is something I think we want to keep on the agenda as we go forward. It gives me pleasure to introduce Pavlos Mayakis, the Policy Analyst, California Department of Housing and Community Development. Pavlos.
Hello, good afternoon, and wow, what a wonderful opportunity to get together and share and learn from each other. I've learned a lot so far, and I was really happy to be following Dina. She had spoken about moving forward and other uses for broadband in the future, for how it relates to being sustainable and resilient. And also it has applications for transportation as well. The unit I work for, we kind of work with the nexus of climate change, transportation, and housing. So I'm acutely aware of how broadband is important going forward to have communities that are sustainable and resilient. So thank you for that reminder. So let's go on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so the Executive Order 7320 charged HCD with leveraging existing California HCD programs such as the Infill Infrastructure Grant Program and the Affordable Housing and Sustainable Communities Program to provide free broadband service for tenants in newly built housing. Ideally, we would like to eventually ascribe to 100 down, 20 up, and have it be free to all tenants in publicly subsidized housing units. So next slide, please. Thank you. So just recently, we published guidelines for the multifamily housing program, or MHP. And that is our primary state NOFA. NOFA is an acronym for Notice of Funding Availability. And the significance of this particular program is there was a bill signed earlier this year, AB 434. And AB 434 essentially charged HCD with establishing what we call a super NOFA. So what that means is we realized that many of our funding programs had often conflicting language. The eligibility requirements for different programs were not always aligned correctly. And also the way HCD works with the California Tax Credit Allocation Committee and the California Debt Limit Allocation Committee, and Cal HFA, all four entities used four different applications for the programs. And within HCD, each program could have a different application process. So the point of what I'm saying is one of the challenges that we're overcoming is we're removing some of the red tape that often occurs when a developer is applying for multiple sources of funding amongst different programs. So what we're doing to implement that executive order is to establish new threshold requirements for our programs. And these threshold requirements will be requiring a basic download and upload speed. So since the MHE program is the flagship program, and let me explain that a little bit more clearly. There's 5 other programs that work along with MHP, or they point to MHP for guidance with language and eligibility requirements. Those programs are the Veteran Housing Program, the Joe Cerna Farm Worker Program, the Transit Oriented Development Program, the Infill Infrastructure Program, Cal Home, and Housing for a Healthy California. So currently, this SuperNOFA, which is starting with the MHP guidelines, which will be published in February of 2022, will require as a threshold requirement the speeds of 25.3. Now, you may wonder, well, why didn't we simply implement 120 for threshold requirements? Well, part of this process, which has, well, I started in my current position in November, so I've been working on the broadband executive order and the subsequent California Broadband for All action plan since that time. And we've engaged heavily with external stakeholders, and what we learned was there are places, especially in the counties that are rural or in the mountainous areas, where 120 just is not feasible currently. So in order to start to roll out broadband requirements, we determined, along with our stakeholder feedback, that 25.3 is a reasonable speed for us to expect each jurisdiction in the state of California to have. So we realize that's not ideal, but it's a starting point to include that as a threshold item. But we wanted to also provide developers with some kind of an incentive so that we could at the same time promote 120. The way we did that was we added additional scoring criteria where if they were able to provide 120 and free or reduced internet service, along with providing a device for connectivity or digital literacy training. So that's kind of the best way we felt to move forward to implement the governor's executive order and to do it in an equitable way. Next slide, please. So in addition to that, the programs that I mentioned previously, they were all for new construction. And we realized there's a huge number of properties within our portfolio that are not, that have been placed in service for several years. And a new NOFA or grant will be coming out. It's called the HCD Portfolio Reinvestment Program. $300 million is currently allocated for this program. And that particular program or NOFA will be geared for projects that are in need of some type of substantial rehabilitation. So we're starting to introduce threshold language into our state programs to start with the 25.3, and we will ramp up as we feel we can in an equitable manner when we know with certainty that every area in the state of California is eligible to have that increased download and upload speed. And finally, one of the items that we're charged with is to advise the CPUC on what we've heard from our stakeholders and our internal conversations as to what what suggestions we might have to make CASIF a little bit more robust, just simply based upon the stakeholder engagement. So we work with multiple agencies. We're working with the California Department of Aging, the Strategic Growth Council, Department of Technology, and our two stakeholder groups. But what I wanted to also talk about, since I have an opportunity with a very well broadband educated audience, is one of the things we're learning when we've engaged our external stakeholders is when it comes to digital literacy, it's important to meet people where they are at. A one-size digital literacy program does not fit all. So that is something for us to consider moving forward. The other thing, as far as providing residents with connected devices, again, a one size does not fit all, especially within our senior communities and communities that require additional supportive services. So that's the consideration. What I've heard, and I'm paraphrasing, is we just can't dump hundreds of laptops into a housing community and say, okay, we've delivered our connected devices, we're good. We need to consider the resident, the needs of each individual resident or the unique needs of the community. So to summarize, we're working to place threshold standards into our programs, and each year or each program round, we will re-review the threshold and the additional point scoring language and tighten it up if we have the assurance that the speeds are available throughout the state. So, you know, our concern is it's an equity issue. So we need to make sure that the upload and download speeds that we wish to create as threshold items are actually attainable. So that's one of our challenges. And I've heard a couple of mentions about tribal communities. I did want to mention that at HCD, we're always growing and we're hiring new people, and we're engaging with tribal communities at a level that has not been seen in recent history. And that needs to, they should probably have a voice when it comes to the what needs to happen with the implementation of creating a broadband for all. Let me just check my notes really quick and make sure I didn't miss talking about something that I wanted to talk about. Yeah, there is one thing, and it had been mentioned previously. We're also looking to find an average cost per unit, both for new construction and for rehabilitation. And we know that each project is different, and the needs and the cost vary. But we also realize it's an important tool to have if they're going to cost out the expense. So we're hoping that we can eventually come up with some kind of a metric for cost per unit. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Pavlos. And in person, we have the California Advanced Services Fund. James, you get to carry the freight, and I think you just got some input from Pavlos on some of his thoughts, but it gives me pleasure to introduce James Tang, the California Advanced Services Fund Program and Project Supervisor from the CPUC. James.
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting the California Public Utilities Commission to participate and present today. And just wanted to introduce a couple of my staff. We got Bill Godecki. He had worked on the housing account for many years. He now works on the broadband adoption account. And Bill, do you want to say a little something?
Hi, guys. Good afternoon. Just that I've been working a long time with the public housing and have seen how the program was implemented. And there's a lot of lessons learned that could be utilized. For example, when Luis was talking about the use of wire to the unit instead of a Wi-Fi in these cinder block buildings is something to be considered when looking at such a program. So these kind of questions are important if we want to, because the programs will be refunded and we're going to be able to revise the rules. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Bill. And I just wanted to bridge the pass with Bill with our new analyst in the housing account. That's Taylor Chime. Taylor, do you want to say something?
Sure. I've been working on the CSF program for, is it 5-6 years now? And when I was first hired, I started working immediately with Bill. So the transition should be as smooth as it can get, since I've been working on housing in the background for several years. But it's nice to sort of take over and do what I can. So I look forward to the applications coming through.
Thanks, Taylor. Okay, so the way that we structure our presentation today is to start with a snapshot of the past on the public housing account grant, and then we're going to end with a look ahead. So I see in the chat earlier acknowledging the co-authoring of AB 1299 of Carolyn and CETF as co-sponsor. So this account, the public housing account, was established by AB 1299. It was later extended by SB 745 through the end of 2020. And $25 million was allocated for grants. $20 million was allocated for infrastructure accounts, which is to bring Wi-Fi to housing communities, and then $5 million for adoption projects for digital inclusion, such as digital literacy projects. The $5 million was fully awarded and exhausted back in 2018. And through 2020, eligibility was for publicly supported communities that are wholly owned by public housing agencies or 501c3 organizations. For projects, we had a total of 322 infrastructure projects that the commission awarded and 128 adoption projects for $13.9 million through inception through 2020. We have 412 projects that are completed, and we have 38 remaining projects between infrastructure and adoption. Next slide, please. So I just want to talk about some of the benefits through 2020. We had 301 infrastructure projects that were completed, and these are providing free broadband connectivity for 21,000 public housing units at 6.1 speeds in 31 counties throughout California. We have 101 adoption projects that are completed to date that provided digital literacy training to over 4,700 public housing residents. Next slide, please. And here we just wanted to cover some of the challenges throughout the program. With AB 1665 that was effective in October 2017, required that the Commission award grants only to unserved housing developments. And as you can see in the graph, the number of applications received significantly was reduced between the years of 2018 to 2020. Other challenges is that project need is best determined by the availability of affordable service, meaning that even though service may be available to low-income residents, they couldn't always afford it or qualify. The other challenge is engineering standards are complex and they need to be understood and systematized in the program and conveyed. So, for example, some of the folks running the grants, they may not understand engineering standards. So some of that needs to be fleshed out from the very beginning and conveyed throughout all phases of the project to the contractors implementing the grant and through completion. The other challenge is the one that we all experience is COVID-19. Some of the digital literacy projects had difficulty staying on track starting last year with stay-at-home orders and social distancing. Next slide, please. So Senate Bill 156 was signed and passed by Governor Newsom. And some of the highlights that changes the program is that it expands eligibility to include publicly supported housing developments and other housing developments or mobile home parks with low-income residents. It was in Public Utilities Code Section 281I3. It eliminated the unserved definition. Eligible locations are no longer limited to publicly subsidized multifamily housing developments, are no longer limited to unserved housing developments, and had not denied a right of access to any broadband provider. And also, the other change is that it also will be available to low-income communities that do not receive free Wi-Fi and or have access to broadband service that offers free Wi-Fi service. Next slide, please. So the next steps is I wanted to convey that with SB 156 and additional bills that pass SB 4 and AB 14, that the commission needs to determine funding allocation and timeline for the housing account. That we're at the very beginning stages. So we have our work cut out to get it all queued up. So one way to follow this is follow CASF proceeding R 20-8-021. And if you haven't signed up, please sign up for the service list for the proceeding. There's also a distribution list for all things CASF related. So to be notified for that, please email CASF_adoption@cpuc.ca.gov to be included on that list. Next slide, please. So once again, wanted to thank you for having the CPUC join today. And we look forward to the future of the housing account. we're trying to set up for long-term sustainability, and there's going to be quite a work moving forward. So stay tuned for more information.
Thank you, James. There have been a number of follow-up questions. If I can ask one, Dina, the two thoughts. One, do the HUD technical assist, it could, and I should probably know this, I'm sure members of my team do, are the HUD technical assistance tools available for those of us that have project-based properties that are not housing authorities? And so if not, is there a way we can expand that conversation?
So that's a great question. This is what I will say. We, as I implied in my comment, we meaning the Connect Home initiative doesn't have a ton of money for technical assistance. My goal is to use it so that it can benefit as many types of housing organizations as possible. So that's another reason I'm very grateful to be here, is to try to understand more about the needs you have on the ground. So yes, if you have, if you're interested in, understanding more about how to connect a unit that's made out of a cinder block, for example, is that something you're interested in? I'd love to know that so that I can assign, the limited technical assistance that we have. We're trying to do case studies and guidebooks and things like that. So I'd really, yes, I would love to know more about what folks need on the ground.
Okay, and then my one follow-on question, do you have a counterpart at Treasury that we could drag into this conversation?
Yes, I can find one for you. Yep, and I have Crystal's email. I think, is that okay if I follow up with Crystal? Okay, yep, I will do that.
The CRA piece would be a great point of leverage, and being able to tie in tax credit properties as well. It's a sizable inventory.
Yep.
James, did you see the question Sunny asked about low income versus publicly subsidized housing priority?
Yeah, I don't think that publicly subsidized housing is deprioritized. I think that it expands on eligibility to mobile homes and housing developments. So I think it addresses more of low income in general and affordability.
So then if I can maybe cut to the chase as a follow-on is, so how much money do you think will be allocated for low income housing broadly defined?
That's a little bit early. That's has yet to be determined, but we hope to be able to share that in the coming months.
Taylor, you can write a number on a piece of paper, just hold it up for us if you want.
Yeah, this is Bill. I would say that basically people should engage in the proceeding in order to help advise the commission on how to proceed in that question.
Absolutely. Echo that sentiment.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we are trying to do, at least for Southern California as a region, is quantify the need. And as we said before, there are 3, maybe 4 major categories of need. One is the actual hard technology. And the Luis was talking about. 2 is the ongoing operating costs and access. 3 is the device, and 4 is the literacy. And so how those pieces stack up and how we can quantify that is something that we're continuing to work on and provide that information. So, and it's not looking to the CPUC as the only funder, but within the spectrum of resources that are available, how do we cobble them together?
Excuse me. Anyway, this is Bill. Oh yeah, there we go. I have another point on that question regarding funding. One of the questions in terms of public housing was that when the housing program was developed, the housers didn't want real high speeds at the housing because they paid for the capacity. So they had that was a cost for them. So if the goal is to provide high speeds to residents of public housing, the question is who pays for the capacity, and can the public housing, for example, groups afford it?
Yeah, and that to a certain extent goes back to Luis's question. It really depends on the property. I mean, new properties that are being built today can handle the highest speeds that are available today. But what it takes to retrofit the old properties is just one of those challenges, depends on, the circumstances in the property. And so I'm sure there's a range. I know what we want for our residents is the very highest speeds that they can get because of the critical nature of telehealth, education, and telework, making all of those opportunities available to our residents as they would be to anybody else. But it's a good question. Roland and Crystal, I'm going to ask you to make sure I'm not missing. And any of the panel members, a question for James. The allocations carved out in the new laws are ongoing, are they not? So this is one of the big questions. There is short-term funding, depending on how you qualify it. The question is, what about the ongoing operating costs? Is that a part of the calculation?
I think with the introduction of several bills that pass, extends the timeline. I believe that 156 expands the program through 2026, and then I think SB 4 expands it through 2032. Then I think the authorization is it allows the CPUC to collect the surcharges up to 150 million per year through the end of that period, 2032. So there is assessment of the surcharge needed moving forward from time to time to be able to sustain the program. But that's what we have so far is the timeline has been expanded, and I think the surcharge collections increased from 66 million to 150 million.
Great. I also there was a comment earlier about it's absolutely the case that we view the internet as a critical utility, using the term broadly defined, but we would not be supportive of adding it into the utility allowance calculations, because that would then drive down rents. And we just need to be really careful about how those formulas work together. So if any other questions at this point, and once again, our intent today, this has been an incredible conversation with amazing participants that I think is really setting the stage for going forward. And so we do very much appreciate the time. I mean, I seldom allocate more than 20 minutes for anything. And so you guys have you've really been through a lot. I'm going to ask Sunny to give us our wrap up and kind of her thoughts about next steps. And we will continue to communicate and consider all of you drafted onto the team as we go forward. So with that, Sunny.
Thank you to our manager coach, Mr. Pontel, if we are a team. I also want to echo your thanks to everyone and also express appreciation for the amazing content that just got shared. We know this area pretty well, and we just learned a ton. So thank you so much. And my colleague, Raquel Sinat, has been working with Dinah and others for so long, with Pavlos, etc. So thank you. I know I've also, Gladys Papalatic is also here. So we are very excited about this. What the Sandag and Skag staff have agreed to do, this very capable and committed team, is first, all of this was recorded, but there will be summary notes that will be available to everybody. If you have additional content or suggestions that you want to provide to the SCAG team, Crystal is taking those, I think, on behalf of Crystal and Roland. Hassan and Comey have named Crystal and Roland to be point on this issue, working with their respective colleagues. So provide that additional information that can be part of the summary notes. We also then want to look at any potential solutions that got identified, as well as the issues that Steve has just itemized for you. And okay, Roland just put his email in to copy both Crystal and Roland so they can work together on any information that you're going to provide. We want to be able to follow up with HUD and HCD and the PUC on how to align resources. I asked, and if the PUC can project, or when you know, the time frame for the rulemaking, because part of what we want to be able to do in Southern California with this umbrella of Southern California transformation is actually put together very specific proposals to go after specific dollars for the infrastructure, for the devices, the digital literacy training. It would be great if in the rulemaking for the PUC, let me just express on behalf of everybody, that there was funding that was available from the public housing account for one application for all of those things. It's very tough to send affordable housing organizations and the housing authorities that are already short-staffed to several places. But we'd like to just, that's a comment that I don't think is yet ex parte, because there's not an open proceeding to my knowledge, James. But you can tell me if I have to file a 3-day notice to everybody. I surely hope not. Okay, and with that, we are intending also there will be a follow-up work group, an actual work group that will take all this information and start marching through the solutions. So thank you on behalf of everyone who planned this from perspective of the California Emerging Technology Fund. I cannot believe what kind of talent and expertise and innovation that we have seen here today. I put a lot into chat, but the internet service providers all expressed a willingness to be partners. And that means from the affordable housing world, we need to say how we need that help that works with the constraints of funding for the housers, for the housing organizations. As Steve said, a good example is there's already such constrained pots of money or sub accounts or subcategories of budgeting that while we think internet, no, it is absolutely essential. We cut to the chase and say internet access is a 21st century civil right. That our goal is digital equity. Everybody is online. Everybody has the digital proficiency to improve their lives, to save time and money. We don't want to get inadvertently caught up in definitions of, is it a utility within the current constrained dollars for the affordable housing organizations or not. It can't be, and for them to still be able to make things work with the budget, operating budgets they have and amount of rental assistance they can receive. And as was said, I think probably by Luis and several other of the housing organizations, for the residents in publicly subsidized housing, they are by definition the poorest Californians. You need an income that is way below what we consider the poverty line in any community, any other community, in order to qualify. They cannot afford the market rate, even the available affordable housing, affordable internet offers that we've all negotiated, that we've put into the public arena. That's why EBB and the successor program as Allison mentioned, are going to be really, really important to get all of our residents signed up for. So with that, I'm ready to close out, Steve, unless you think there's another directive to people. But with great gratitude to everyone, and know that we will be following up, and our timeline. Skag and Sandag never want me to be setting the timelines, but we have to have a game plan by the end of 2022, which means we're going to have the summary done, any other suggestions you have added to that, and a work groups established so that we can go forward and actually get the job done. Thank you very, very much for participating today.
Thank you all very much. Be safe out there.
Bye-bye. Thanks a lot.